Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining me on the webinar, Setting Your Horse Up for Success. So we're going to be talking about fitness and conditioning of your horses. Now, this is a really huge topic. There's lots that I can talk about. So I'm not going to go hugely into depth on some things. It's more of a broad overview of lots of different things that you need to consider when bringing your horse into work and increasing fitness. And not just about the actual program of what you're going to be doing at each stage of the fitness program, but lots of other things to think about as well. So just a little bit about me for those of you who don't know me. So I'm Christine. I'm an equine body worker, and I first qualified as an equine body worker about 18 years ago. I then got out of bodywork a little bit for a while, coached in riding schools, taught at an agricultural college, lectured at a uni in equine science, so done quite a few other things in between. Worked at the RSPCA for a while, going out to schools and teaching them about animal care and also running an equine program for them. So some of my qualifications, I do have a bachelor degree in equine science and also a graduate certificate in equine science. I'm a UK qualified riding coach, so as well as looking at this from a body worker point of view, there will be some coaching and some of that general fitness side of things. So, you know, as well as riding, I used to event, not so much anymore. I'm more sort of dressage focused now. But I also used to help keep horses fit for point to points over in the UK and things like that. So, you know, horses that needed to have quite a high level of fitness. Now, I am also working on some different qualifications to help with the riders. So I'm currently studying a diploma of remedial massage and also a degree in osteopathy. So as well as looking at the horses, I'll be able to help people with looking at themselves. Okay, so I am just going to stop my video so that we can just concentrate on the screen for now. If you've got any questions throughout, please just pop them in the Q&A box, and so I'll do my best to try and answer them as we go. If not, I'll try and answer them all at the end. Okay, so before you even start bringing your horse back into work, there are some things that you really need to be thinking about, making sure that you've done. So if your horse is due to have their hooves either trimmed or reshod, get that done, because you know, if your horse's feet are long, then that's not going to help them with using their body. So we do need to make sure that, you know, their feet are in a good condition, because their feet have a huge impact on their body. So if your horse hasn't had shoes on and usually has shoes on, then you might want to think about whether you get that done at the start as well. Same for their teeth. If it's been a while since they last saw a dentist, you'd want to make sure that you get their teeth done. So generally most horses need them done every 12 months. Some do need them done more regularly. So if you're edging up towards that 12 months, I would suggest getting that done prior to actually starting to bring the horse into work, because as soon as you start putting a bit in the horse's mouth, if they have got any sharp edges on their teeth, then that's going to cause some issues for you. Likewise for your tack, if your horse has had a bit of time off, then there is a good chance that their body might have changed shape slightly, and so your saddle may not be fitting quite as well as it was previously. Now, your saddle fitter may be able to help you with figuring out some ways of getting your saddle to fit in the interim, because obviously as you start to bring your horse back into work, again, the horse's body will change shape. So it may be that you need to get the saddle fitter out a couple of times in those early stages of bringing your horse back into work, or they may be able to give you some suggestions of using shims and so on to just pad that out in the interim until your horse starts to build up some muscle. Obviously I'm a body worker, so I am going to suggest that you get your horse's body looked at before you bring them back into work. Make sure that there's nothing going on that is going to cause any issues as they start to work, and also your body. So as riders, we're often very good at forgetting about ourselves, get our horses looked at. You know, they see the vet regularly and have a massage or a chiro or osteo or whatever it is that you use. And then, you know, I'm talking to riders and say, well, when did you last see a therapist? And the answers can be quite shocking. In fact, sometimes, you know, years, if ever. So, you know, make sure that you get your body looked after. And if you're very unfit, then you'd also want to be considering a fitness program for yourself as well as your horse. So why should you follow a fitness and conditioning program? And I know lots of people just jump on their horse and off they go, and there's no issues. But we do need to think about what is best long-term for the horse. And just because we can do something in the short term doesn't mean it's necessarily best for them in the long term. So, you know, we need to make sure that the fitness that you're the fitness program that you're following for your horse is actually appropriate for your discipline, because those of you who event, your requirements or your horse's requirements are going to be very different to a dressage rider, to an endurance rider, and so on. So what would be good at the moment is if you can pop into the chat box what discipline you mainly work in, or what discipline you're mainly interested in, just so I can try and give you some ideas for that. I know with the questions that were asked when you reserved your places, there was quite a variety of different disciplines, which was fantastic. Now, horses generally do remember their prior training. You know, so if you've got an older horse which has done a fair bit, they do actually remember that to some extent. They don't completely forget what has happened. So it's about increasing their fitness and then sort of some fine tuning of their training. You know, it's a bit like riding a bike. You don't necessarily forget it. You might be a bit wobbly to start off with, but you haven't completely forgotten the principles of it. So let's have a look what disciplines we've got here. So show jumping and eventing, dressage, eventing, sporting, show jumping, prelim, novice, dressage, horse archery. Fantastic. I'm keen to have a go at horse archery. I'm not sure my horse would like that, but we're going to have a go at some different things this year, so maybe horse archery is on the cards. Dressage and harness, dressage, moving on to eventing, carriage driving, endurance, working equitation, dressage, pony club, show jumping, eventing, trail riding, endurance. Great. So lots of different disciplines, which is fantastic. And, you know, don't think that just because you're, you know, and I often hear people say, oh, I'm just a trail rider. Doesn't make any difference. Your horse still needs to be fit. You know, trail horses actually have a really good level of fitness and need quite a good level of fitness. So, you know, please don't ever say, I'm just a trail rider, therefore my horse doesn't need X, Y, and Z. Okay, so why should we follow a fitness and conditioning program? Well, poor fitness can cause, reduced performance. So obviously for most of us that are going out competing, our aim is to get the best results possible. If your horse isn't fit, then they're going to be sore, they're going to be tired, they're not going to be able to actually perform when you get there. So, you know, it is important to make sure that we follow that fitness and conditioning program so that they can perform at their best. Increased fatigue. So, you know, fatigue, essentially the horse being tired, the muscles being fatigued, can cause things like tripping, which can lead to an increased risk of injury. You know, things like they might start knocking rails if they're jumping, say tripping over their feet, not quite coordinating themselves enough, and so that's quite a big thing as far as risk goes. So we want to ensure that you and your horse are safe. We've already spoken briefly about the increased risk of injury. Pain, so exactly the same as us. You know, if we suddenly go out and start exercising without following a steady increase in that fitness program, then we're very sore the next day. So we want to try and prevent that for our horse. And behavioural issues. Now, most of those either come from pain or fatigue, those sorts of things. The horse is rarely naughty just for the sake of being naughty. They don't go out and think, I know, today I'm going to buck my rider off. They do that for a reason. And yes, sometimes that is that they've got too much energy, but often it's that they're sore somewhere, or they're mentally fatigued. So it's not just about their body, it's also about their brain. So it is important that we follow a fitness or a conditioning program. So some things for you to consider when setting your program. And say, today I'm not going to be setting specific fitness programs for you, because we've got such a wide range of different disciplines and levels, and your fitness program would be very individual to what you're doing. But I do hope that I'll be able to give you an overview of some of the things that you need to consider and how you can step that fitness up each time you step up a level or when you bring your horse back into work. So first of all, what is your goal? What is your discipline? What's your level? So you need to ensure that when you're planning your program, that you give yourself enough time to get to that level of fitness. So for example, if you are planning on going into a prelim event, then, as I'll discuss later on, probably about 8 weeks is enough. But if you're looking at eventing, doing some higher level work, high level dressage, high level jumping and so on, then you're going to want to give yourself a little bit more time. And you also need to start planning when you're going to introduce some of those different things. So if you're eventing, when you're going to start bringing your faster canter and your gallop work, your cross country training. For your endurance, how you're going to build up that level or the distance that you're riding. Carriage driving, now I have to be honest, I don't know a huge amount about carriage driving, but from what I've seen, it's going to be a similar thing depending on which specific area of carriage driving you're in. Is it that speed and endurance side of things that you need, and how are you going to increase that? So we need to think about what type of fitness is required. So cardiovascular, so speed or endurance. Is it going to be a short burst of very fast work like a racehorse, or is it going to be an endurance, going for hours, or whatever it is? So that's what we need to think about when we're planning that, to make sure that whatever your plan is, you incorporate that and gradually build up to meet what the requirements of that discipline or that level is that you're doing. Do they need a lot of strength? Do they need a lot of flexibility? Now, I'd probably say that most horses probably need a good combination of both. And where they need their strength and flexibility is possibly going to vary a little bit. But again, by introducing the movements that are going to be needed as you progress, you'll make sure that your horse is ready to do that. For example, if I went out and tried to be a gymnast right now, I would fail terribly. In all fairness, if I went out to try and be a marathon runner right now, I would fail terribly as well. If I tried to just run 5Ks, I would also fail. But if I had a plan of what I was going to do, I could build it up to get to that 5Ks, then I could build it up to get to a 10K, and gradually build up to get to a marathon if that was what I wanted to do. Consider how long it is until your first event. So you actually need to plan backwards from when your first event is. So if you haven't started to bring your horse back into work yet, and your first event is next week, then you've probably left it a little bit late. And depending on what it is, you might want to reconsider that. But think about giving yourself a good period of time. And for horses that have been out of work for a while, I would suggest 8 weeks is a good time to be planning to bring them back into work slowly, so that they're ready for that. If they've only had a short period of time off, or have been sort of doing bits and pieces over the summer, then you might you can decrease that, so you might be ready to bring them out in 3 or 4 weeks. Now, I know we did have some people from other countries, so there are some things I'll talk about which are specific to the Australian summer at the moment. They'll also be relevant to you guys in summer, but I think at the moment most of you are in winter. So when I start talking about heat and humidity, you probably think I'm going to be a bit crazy, but it's very hot and humid here at the moment. What is the age and condition of your horse? I'm going to talk about diet a bit later on. because that is important within fitness and conditioning. But an older horse, although they will remember the training, an older horse can take a longer period of time to bring up to peak fitness compared to a younger horse that is in their peak age. So if you're looking at a 15, 18-year-old horse compared to a 6 or a 7-year-old horse, then that is going to take a little bit longer. Prior training. So what prior training has your horse had? That will just help with some of that. We talk about muscle memory a bit. It's going to help a little bit, and it's also going to give you an idea of whether you can just jump straight on your horse. Is it an older horse which has come in and out of work, knows its job, is going to behave? Is it a younger horse which might skyrocket you out of the saddle if you try and jump on it? And also, has your horse had any previous injuries? And if they've had a spell because of a previous injury, I would highly recommend you make sure that you've got clearance from your vet to start bringing them back into work, and also get a body worker to definitely look them over. And probably they're going to need a little bit more maintenance as you bring them back into work to make sure that there's no issues reoccurring. So what I'm talking about does really, I guess, assume that your horse is fit and healthy, doesn't really take into account those injuries. So if your horse has had an injury and is recovering, then please make sure that you do get some advice from a vet or a body worker first. Okay, so here's a question for you guys. Do you know what the most common cause of an injury in the ridden horse is? So I'll just give you a moment to pop some answers in there. So pop them into the chat box if you can think of what the most common cause of injury in the ridden horse might be. Now I know there'll be at least one person that will definitely know the answer, because she was at a workshop with me not too long ago. Oh, there's another therapist that's got it. So yeah, we're getting some great answers here. So let me just pop back. Back problems, leg problems. Yeah, so often in the back or the leg is where we get those issues, but what actually causes them? Overworked, ill-fitting gear, not doing a proper warm-up or lack thereof, ridden too hard for fitness level, muscular strains, warm up and cool down, overwork, ill-fitting saddle, ridden too long if not fit, hoof issues, muscle pain, too much work too soon. Yeah, all fantastic answers, and they're all in the right ballpark. So the most common cause of injury is repetitive strain. So all of those things that you've come up with are absolutely correct. So I missed a couple. We've got sort of hoof care and hoof issues. Yeah, absolutely. As I said before, looking after the feet is really, really important, because the feet have a huge impact on the body. The body can also have an impact on the feet. So it is a case of working closely with body workers and farriers to make sure that the whole body is working correctly. So repetitive strain. So if I say to you repetitive strain injury, what's the first thing that pops into your mind with that? Okay, so not changing up the routine. Yep. Tendons, muscle strains. Yep, absolutely. Same workout routine. Yep, absolutely. All of those correct. Doing the same thing over and over. Yep, perfect. So repetitive strain is caused by doing the same thing over and over again. Now, it's not necessarily that that it's the rider doing the same thing with the horse. Okay, so that's what most people think of, and yes, that absolutely can be the cause of it, but it's not necessarily that horse has got a tendon injury because the rider drilled that horse in shouldering or half pass or did too many 10-meter circles or whatever the cause, whatever that rider does. It's not necessarily that. It can be how the horse is actually using itself. So exactly the same as us, you know, we work in a way that is most comfortable for us, and it's not necessarily the best way for our body. So if a horse is overloading one leg consistently, then it's going to get some sort of injury in that leg just because of how the horse is using itself. And that's where it's really important. I'm going to talk a little bit about riding a bit later on, but you know, your body work and your ridden work, they're really important to build them up together to avoid that repetitive strain. But yes, absolutely, you also do not want to make sure that you're not constantly doing the same thing over and over again. So you know, don't spend half an hour doing 10-meter circles or 45 minutes doing half pass or travers or renvers or you know, whatever it might be. Apart from the fact that you know, your horse might get a little bit fed up of it, yes, absolutely, those things will cause a repetitive strain. So the type of surface that you should ride on, and I've done a few videos in the past on this, but riding on different types of surfaces can help to strengthen different structures of the horse. So it is really important to try and ride on a variety of surfaces. Now, I know a lot of obviously endurance riders, show jumpers, eventers, and I'm fairly sure your carriage drivers are very good at this. Dressage riders, I know we all love, and I'm a dressage rider and I have a Sandorina and I love riding in my Sandorina, but please try and get out of it every now and again because it's really important for your horse's body. So the softer surfaces such as sand require an increased muscular effort and a greater range of motion of the joints. So your softer surfaces are going to work your soft tissues more, so your muscles, your tendons, and so on. Okay, so if you have a horse which is recovering, for example, from a tendon injury, I would recommend that you don't work them too much in a really deep sand surface, especially to start off with, because that is going to put too much strain on those soft tissues. Okay, if anybody's ever gone for a walk down the beach, if you're unfit, you come back and you're absolutely exhausted and your muscles really ache. Okay, so sand is fantastic because it's a nice, generally a even surface, but we don't want it to be too deep, and we do need to remember that it is hard work for the horse. Firm surfaces stimulate bone adaptations and can increase bone density. So years ago, we were told to do lots of trotting on roads because it helps to strengthen tendons. That has been proven to not be the case now. So if you're working on roads, walk as much as you like, fantastic. Walking on roads, absolutely brilliant, but try to limit the amount of trotting you're doing because that concussive damage, the concussive forces can cause problems as well as walking on them does, you know, the good things. So yes, you know, road work is great, and again, because roads are generally nice and flat and smooth, it gives an even surface to work on, but just try to limit the amount of trotting you're doing on roads. Uneven and undulating ground increases the horse's proprioceptive skills, so where they're putting their legs, so, or their feet. So you know, when they're only ever working on really flat surfaces, they lose that proprioception of where their feet are and what's going on under their feet. So by working on some slightly uneven ground, especially if you're planning on competing on slightly uneven and undulating ground, so you know, show jumpers if you're riding in a grass ring, dressage riders if you're riding in a grass ring, carriage drivers if you're on a grass surface, obviously eventers going around a cross-country course, you need to make sure that you include those surfaces in your fitness program. And hill work. So again, probably best not to include a huge amount of hill work early on because it's really hard on your horse's body. And again, exactly the same as if we went to walk up a big hill or a mountain, you know, you're going to be sore. So hill work is great, working up and down hills. You can work diagonally across those slopes to make it a little bit easier for the horse and to have some slightly different focuses on different parts of the body. So hill work is great, but again, not too much too soon. Okay, so just getting in a little bit. So I'm going to talk a bit about the first 4 weeks and then go on to some different things and then talk about some of the later weeks of your fitness program. So in the ideal world, week 1, you would do in-hand walk work only. Okay, especially if your horse, remember this is if your horse has had a long time off. If your horse has only had a couple of weeks off, you might want to skip weeks 1 and 2, or maybe even 3. But if your horse has had a long time off, so 6 months, even 4 months is quite a long time for a horse to have off, try and do some in-hand walk with them. Their muscles of their back aren't used to carrying a rider. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to try and answer this course. Long grass for carriage driving, would it be much like working a ridden horse on sand? It depends how long the grass is. So, yeah, I guess, yeah, it really depends on how long that grass is. If it's, above fetlock height, then yes, it's going to cause a little bit more, it's going to require a little bit more effort. Probably not as much as sand, because in sand the feet actually sink into it, and the sand moves, whereas at least on grass, longer grass, they have that solid soil surface at the base, and they can kind of go through the top of the grass. Does that make sense? I hope I've answered that well enough. Where would you start with a horse that's been out for approximately 6 weeks? So that's going to depend on a variety of things. I would suggest starting, as we go through this, I'll have a look, maybe start week 3 or 4, but just you would need to monitor the horse and see how they're going, because it is going to be an individual thing. Okay, so sorry, just going back to week 1. So say in the ideal world, we would do in-hand walk only. That will help to start building up those muscles that are going to carry the rider, because remember, the horse is not designed to carry the weight of a rider. So we need to try and help them by building those muscles up. Ideally, and you'll see throughout this, I only recommend 3 to 4 sessions a week. There's no need to be riding your horse 5 or 6 times a week. 3 to 4 sessions have been shown to improve your horse's fitness sufficiently, and also reduce the risk of them injuring themselves through that repetitive strain, and it gives them enough time to recover in between. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in depth a bit later on. So starting off roughly around 20 minutes on day 1, and add 2 or 3 minutes per day of walking. If you've got a horse which has done a lot of in-hand work before, you can obviously start to introduce some of your transitions and actually do some proper in-hand work. Or if your horse hasn't done any in-hand work before, it might be a case of just walking them around. Ideally, you want to be doing as many straight lines as possible and large flowing turns. So this is where, if you've got a really large arena, or you can get out on the roads, that's great. And again, a variety of surfaces, so starting off hopefully not too soft. Excuse me. Week 2, again, we're still walking. Still only 3 to 4 sessions during the week. Start off by doing 5 to 10 minutes of in-hand work, just to start to warm those muscles up, and then do 20 minutes ridden and add around 5 minutes of walking per day. Okay, as week 1, so your straight lines, your large flowing turns, but you can start introducing some things like walking over poles, introducing circles, and your transitions. So transitions within the walk, so slowing the walk down, speeding the walk up, and halt to walk transitions. On week 3, you're going to start introducing some trot work. Again, we're still working on aiming at 3 to 4 sessions of work during the week, looking at roughly 40 minutes per session. Starting off with around 5 minutes trot within that 40 minutes. So do it in 1 to 2 minute blocks. Make sure that when you're doing these, that you do give your horse sufficient time to warm up. So giving them a good 5 to 10 minutes just purely of walk before you start to do any trot work at all. And I know lots of people will just sort of go into the arena, walk around one way, change the rein, walk around another way. Time yourself doing that. I bet it's probably only about 2 minutes. So good 5 to 10 minutes of just walk, and you can introduce some transitions and things to get the horse thinking in that warm up, but we want to give them time to warm their muscles up before we start introducing the trot, and say just do it in 1 to 2 minute blocks and increase it by 2 to 3 minutes per day. So by the end of the week, you'll be doing around 10 to 15 minutes of trot work within your 40 minutes. Transitions, lateral work in walk and circles. So there's no reason why you can't start introducing some of these movements early on. And I would highly recommend that any rider in any discipline does this work. It's really important for your horse to be using themselves correctly, and lateral work, transitions, circles and so on, they're really good ways of getting the horse to use their body correctly. And if we can get the horse using their body correctly and carrying themselves correctly, then that's going to reduce their risk of injury later on. Week 4, you're going to start introducing your canter. So say for that horse that somebody asked about that has had about 6 weeks off, I'd be looking to start somewhere between a week 3 and a week 4, depending on how fit your horse is and whether it's had any previous injuries. I would try starting off maybe the first half of the week with your week 3. And if your horse seems to be coping really well with that, then sort of do the second half of the week with introducing the canter work from week 4. Again, still only 40 minutes per session, and I don't think I actually recommend more than 40 minutes per session throughout this presentation. There's really no need to be working your horse for hours. You can achieve everything you need to in a shorter session. Obviously, if you're out trail riding or you're having a lesson, then it might be longer, but you're probably going to have lots of rest time within that as well. Okay. All right, so just bear with me one moment. Okay, so hopefully I've answered that question on the horse that's had 6 weeks off. So yeah, so you're going to be doing roughly 15 minutes of trot per day, increase it again by about 15 minutes, 3 minutes per day. That would be maximum, and then 3 minutes of canter increased by 1 minute a day. And again, you probably need to split that canter down into shorter periods. Don't start off by doing 3 minutes of canter straight off, because you know, possibly you and your horse might be exhausted by the end of that. So short bursts, lots of rest times in between. Okay. So key points. So lunging. So look, I'm not a huge fan of doing lots of lunging. So this is going to depend on your horse and what areas you have. And the reason I'm not keen on a lot of lunging is that it is very hard on the horse's joints. So if you're doing lunging, then only do short sessions. Ideally, you'd lunge in an area where you can actually move around, so you're not just working on an 18 or 20 meter circle that you can do lots of straight lines. But look, if you've got a horse that you think is going to dump you as soon as you get on it, then yes, obviously, you know, you probably want to lunge that horse before you get on it. Obviously, when you're lunging, there is an increased risk of the horse injuring themselves, because they often go a bit silly on the lunge. So long reining, in-hand work ideally is better if you can, but I know that's not always possible. Okay, so just have another question. So if you've only got a round yard, as it's the only flat surface you have, what would you recommend in this case? Again, it's going to depend on your horse. In the ideal world, if you only have a round yard, start off in the round yard and then go out into either the paddock for a ride around or out for a trail ride. But probably when you're starting to introduce your trot work and your canter work to start off with, you might want to be in the round yard for safety. So yes, that's great as a flat surface to do that. It's not ideal, but you can work with it. Just make sure that you're not just going around and around. You know, do lots of things in between. Say maybe do one session in the round yard and then go out for a trail ride the next day, and so on. Boots and bandages. So I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that boots and bandages don't necessarily support your horse's legs. They do protect them though. So if you've got a horse which is a real klutz and often knocks its legs, then yes, you might want to think about putting boots and bandages on. But if you've got a horse which is a pretty straight mover, has no injuries, and you're just doing some trail riding, or out on the road, nowhere really rocky or anything, or you're in the arena, then consider whether you really need to use boots and bandages, because one of the main problems with boots and bandages is that they do heat up the horse's legs. And there's been some studies done in the past that show that boots and bandages can actually heat up the horse's tendons to the point where the tendons start to degenerate because of the heat. So obviously, if you're going out doing for your show jumping around, your cross country, things like that, yes, you would want to have something on for the protection. But when you're doing your flat work, either use the lightest boots or bandages that you can find, or if you can, go without. Is your horse moving correctly? Now, I could do a whole another webinar on is your horse moving correctly, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But we need to make sure that your horse is moving straight, that they're using their bodies correctly. So if your horse is crooked, if they're not using their forelegs evenly, so a lot of horses will prefer to use one leg over another. If they're sort of sticking their chest out, so they're really on the forehand, trailing their hind legs out behind them, then that's going to cause damage with the horse's body. So I would highly recommend you looking at, if you don't already have a coach, one that is that specializes in biomechanics is great, and there are lots of coaches around who specialize in sort of correct movement or functional movement, and that is really important for your horse. Fatigue we've already spoken about, so it really is important that you keep an eye on your horse, and if they start stumbling, they start getting really wobbly on their straight lines, you're having to really push them into the trot or the canter, then chances are they're fatigued, and stop riding them. Don't push them beyond that. Warm up and cool down, we've already spoken about the warm up and how important that is, but your cool down is equally important. So again, at the end of your ride, ideally 5 or 10 minutes, depending on how hot your horse is, just of walking around. Allow the muscles to slowly cool down before you go and put your horse away. Rest days. So rest days are really, really important for your horse. Okay, so as I said before, in all of the stuff that I've put up on this webinar, I've only recommended 3 or 4 work sessions per week, and that is because those rest days are super important. So your horses, essentially the way they build muscle is the muscle has micro tears whenever we work it, same as us. So the muscle actually has some micro damage to it, and then during the rest days the body repairs itself, and those muscles that are working harder, or the bone that's working harder, the body is very clever and it says, oh, we need to build more muscle, or we need to lay down a bit more bone in this area because that's where there's more pressure going on. So if you don't give your horse those rest days, then you're not actually allowing the body to repair itself, ready for your next work session. And heat and humidity. So obviously, I think it was about 37 degrees here in Brisbane today, so it was pretty hot. You want to try and ride in the coolest part of the day if you can. I know when we're competing, it's not always an option to pick your times, but especially when you're training, and if you've got a really unfit horse, they're going to feel the heat a lot more than your fitter horses. So make sure that you are working in the coolest parts of the day. And look, if it's seriously stinking hot, consider whether you need to ride at all. Can that be the horse's rest day? Okay, so one of the questions that I was asked on Facebook was, how do you know when you need to take a step back? It's a really complicated question to answer. but a pain-free horse will perform better. So picking up on the early signs that your horse is in pain or is struggling will result in a quicker resolution of issues, improved outcome and better welfare for the horse. If the horse suddenly starts being reluctant to be caught, tacked up, or is getting really girthy, then they could be signs that your horse is not happy about something, okay? So again, you might want to get a vet or a body worker or somebody else out to look at your horse. You might want to just give them a couple of days off, do something different, check that your tack is fitting, all of those things. Posture. If the horse suddenly starts standing in a different posture, so if they normally stand nice and square when they're just standing there eating their hay or being groomed, and they start standing with one leg forward or back, or you suddenly notice that they're sort of hollowing their back, putting both legs slightly further back so they're sort of, you know, behind legs out behind them, then they're all signs that there's something sore in the horse's body that you need to look at. Is there any heat or swelling anywhere in the horse? So obviously, you know, most of us look at the horse's legs for that, but it can appear anywhere. So make sure you check your horse daily for any signs of heat or swelling. Reluctance during riding. So if your horse, and we've spoken about this a little bit before, you know, if your horse suddenly starts to, you're having to really push your horse to go into trot or to go into canter or to keep that, then again, there might just be something there. Really, if you're in doubt, take a step back, and that's really the best thing I can suggest. And look, I've been there a long time ago, so I think I was about 18 at the time, had a horse. There was just something, I couldn't put my finger on it, there was just something not quite right. I spoke to a couple of people, they said, no, there's nothing wrong with your horse, keep going. Took him out for a ride. Halfway home, he's suddenly hopping lame, and he had pulled tendons. So I really kicked myself that I didn't listen to that, that gut feeling that there was actually something wrong with that horse. There was no heat in the legs. I had lots of people look at it, but I just knew there was something. And I think your horse is the best. So if you're in doubt, take a step back. Maybe go back a week, give them a couple of days off. Just keep maintaining at that week of intensity for another week, whatever it is you need to do. And obviously, if you're ever in doubt, then definitely consult your vet or body worker. Your vet is the expert at diagnosing. So remember, body workers can't diagnose anything that's going on with your horse. That's down to your vet. Wind galls that go up and down, how much would they concern you? I would suggest having a chat with your vet. I've had horses in the past that have had things like wind galls. They've not caused any issues for those horses, and they've always been sound, and they've, but again, that's a very individual thing. So perhaps just when you have your vet out for a routine check, just have them look the horse over, have a chat about whether you need to do anything specific for those sorts of things. I'm not going to play this video because there are 4 of them and they're quite long, but I'll send this link out to you all. But these are some really good videos that I would suggest you watch. So it's a series of 4 videos, I think, detecting early signs of pain and lameness. And they're really fantastic. They've been designed for horse owners, riders, trainers, to help them to help you to recognize those early signs that a horse might be in pain. Okay, so highly recommend you spend some time watching these. I'll send the links out in an email in the next couple of days along with this recording, and I'll also pop them. I have had them on Facebook in the past, but I'll pop them on Facebook again at some point. Okay, so building muscles, which is what we're all aiming to do with our horse. So horses from all disciplines need to build muscle, and the athletic horse needs appropriate muscle mass to support their rider's weight, perform the task at hand, and protect their joints and support soft tissues. So can diet alone build muscle? Short answer, no. So, and I've put this in because I often see on Facebook, people asking how to build muscle, and everybody talks about diet, but just pumping a load of food into your horse is not going to build muscle. Yes, it will help, but the only way they're going to build muscle is to use that muscle, so training and exercise. When should you increase their feed or change their diet? Look, that's going to depend on the individual horse a little bit. If they're a bit lean to start off with, then obviously they're going to need to have more food. If you've got a really good doer and they're looking really well, I probably wouldn't be changing their feed much over at least the first couple of weeks. Probably not until you start upping that amount of trot work and introducing their canter. And even then, it might only be a small amount of increase in feed to make sure that they're getting enough of the nutrients that they need. Okay, so protein is the most important part of feed for building muscle. And protein has had a bit of a bad rap in the past, in that people think that feeding protein makes the horse go crazy. It's not. It's probably not the protein that's making them go crazy. It's all of the other nutrients that are in the feed that we're giving the horse. So just by increasing the amount of energy that we're giving the horse, of course, there's going to be more energy to burn. So during exercise, the horse's muscles are broken down and then they repair and rebuild during rest. So the proteins that your horse needs, there are some different categories of protein. So there's the essential proteins, non-essential and conditionally indispensable. So the essential proteins are the ones that can't be made by the horse. So we have to provide them in their diet. So probably one of the ones that you've heard about most is lysine, if you've heard of any of the specific proteins. And if you haven't, it doesn't matter. We just need to know that we need to provide these proteins in the horse's diet. And most feeds, even hay does to a certain extent have protein, grass has protein. But if we're exercising the horse, working them harder, then we need to make sure that they get enough protein to make up for that. So your essential proteins are the ones that your horse can't make. The non-essential ones are the ones that the horse's body can make. So we don't necessarily need to include those in the diet. And then the conditionally indispensable ones, these are ones that can usually be made by the horse, but there are certain circumstances that mean that the horse can't produce them. So if the horse is in poor health, they may not be able to provide these conditionally indispensable proteins. So proteins are made up of amino acids, and ideally we should be replacing these amino acids or the proteins within 45 minutes of exercise, okay? Because as soon as you stop exercising, your horse's body is immediately going to go into repair mode. So that doesn't mean that you want to be giving your horse a huge great feed straight after work, but ideally you would give them a small amount of something which has got some proteins in. So maybe a small amount of feed. So either your hard feed that you usually give them, which has got a good protein source in them. Lupins are another good protein source. So you might give them some lupins just in a very small feed. And then there are some different supplements that you can also give your horse. So there's a few sort of protein bars and things that you can give your horse as well. So we're just starting to replace those proteins within that 45 minutes to help the body to repair itself. General nutrition is also important for building muscles, as well as the protein intake, because if the horse's dietary intake doesn't meet its requirements, protein will be used as energy rather than for building muscle. So that's why if you've got a really skinny horse, you can be feeding a high protein diet, but it's not actually going to be building muscle because its body needs it for other stuff at that point in time. And likewise, if you're giving it protein but not a lot of other nutrients, and you're working the horse, then that protein is going to be used for energy and other things rather than for building muscle. And I'm not going to go into detail, but if the amino acids are insufficient, they may affect the utilization of other minerals within the diet. I just really briefly want to touch on turning fat into muscle, because it's something that you hear a lot. We just need to turn that fat into muscle. Well, I hate to tell you, the fat that I've got on my body is always going to be fat. It's not going to suddenly magically turn into muscle. So muscle increases in size. Hopefully the fat will reduce, but it's not a transferable part of the animal. And also water and salt is important in the horse's diet. So salt is essentially used in every, and water is used in every function of the horse. And I'm doing physiology at the moment, and it's amazing how many cell functions involve water, salt, potassium. So these things are super important. So make sure that you give your horse sufficient water, that it has a constant supply of fresh water and salt. And I can't remember the exact amount that a horse is supposed to have of salt. I know I've done a post on it before. I think it's something like 10 grams per 100 kilos. So if you've got a 500 kilo horse, they should be having about 50 grams of salt on a normal basis. If it's really hot or they're sweating a lot because they're working, then they might need more of that. Okay, so just make sure that we are providing enough salt. How do you balance a good doer that you're trying to lose weight off but don't want them to fit without reducing their feed too much? So I would just make sure that you're giving your horse a good protein source. I have done a video before on going more in depth on how much protein and things horses need, and yeah, so I'd make sure that you're giving them enough protein, but look at what types of feed you're giving them. So it's high in protein, giving them enough of those other nutrients, but maybe not too much on the things that are going to make them get fatter. And so yeah, it's a bit of an artwork sometimes with horses. There's the science of nutrition, and then there's the art of looking at the actual individual, because we can look at nutrition programs and they're great as a guide, but nothing ever 100% suits every horse. Okay, all right, we're almost at an hour already, and I'm still got a way to go, so I'm going to just speed through these few weeks. So weeks 5 to 8, so you're going to start introducing work that's specific to your disciplines. So your weeks 1 to 4 were kind of general, didn't matter which discipline it was you were doing, but in your weeks 5 to 8 you're going to start introducing more specific work. So whether that's jumping, your faster canter work, collected or lengthened work, introduce it gradually over 4 weeks. And increase one thing at a time. So if you're going to introduce the intensity of their work, or the duration of their work, or how frequently they're worked, do them one thing at a time. Don't suddenly decide that you're going to work your horse. You've been working your horse 3 days a week for 40 minutes and doing some walk, trot, canter, circles, and then the next week you're going to start riding them 5 times a week for an hour and a half each, and they're going to be doing boot camp of half pass, counter canter, flying changes, and cross country. Your horse will not appreciate it. So think about increasing one thing at a time. So if you're going to increase the intensity of their work, so you're moving up into that next level of the components of your discipline, do that, but keep the duration and the frequency the same, or keep the intensity the same, but increase the number of times that you ride that week. By the end of week 8, as I said earlier, you really should be ready to sort of be working, doing a prelim dressage competition, maybe even a low level jumping sort of thing. If you're wanting to do something that needs more fitness, obviously we're going to need to go into those weeks 9 to 12. If your horse hasn't seen a body worker since you brought them into work, they probably need to be seeing a body worker, probably more at the start of week 5 than week 8, because as you start to increase that intensity of their work, obviously the body's going to need a little bit of TLC. Competing and traveling. Make sure that you include your competitions as part of your weekly workload. So don't work your horse 4 times in the week and then ride it at the weekend, because your horse is going to be fatigued by the time it actually gets to that competition. So if you're planning on competing 1 or 2 days at the weekend, that is one of your work days. So if you're working your horse 4 days during the week, you've got a competition day and maybe 3 days in the lead up, and probably give them the day off beforehand if you can. I know often, you know, we want to work the horse, introduce it to the area when we get to the competition venue, and that's fine, but you know, maybe don't work them quite as intensely as you would usually, because remember, we want them to be ready for that competition the next day. And when we're taking them to a competition, they've also got the mental fatigue of being there, and the traveling is, you know, can be quite tiring for the horse. So we also need to consider how long have they traveled. You know, whether they're in a truck or a float or whatever they're being traveled in, they're constantly having to use their muscles to balance. So that is work in itself. Okay. Weeks 9 to 12. So again, you're increasing the amount or the intensity of the exercise, bring in the faster work. You might think about, again, we're increasing this gradually over 4 weeks. You might do some things like interval training. So for those of you that don't know what interval training is, it's essentially more intense work in shorter sessions. So you might, for example, start introducing interval training by doing a brisk trot and doing 3 sets of 6 minutes with some walk time in between, and then you stop. Your next set or your next level up might be 10 minutes of trot, give them 5 minutes walk just to recover, do 3 minutes of canter, 5 minutes walk, 5 minutes of canter, and that might be, you know, a faster canter preparing for your cross country. And then you set 3, or your next level up again might be 10 minutes of trot, 5 minutes of walk, 5 minutes of canter, 3 minutes of walk, 5 minutes of canter. So they're quite short and sharp sessions. Often we monitor the horse's heart rate during that. So the walk sessions often are long enough to allow the pulse rate to drop down to almost that pre-work rate before we move on to the next set of interval training at that faster work. The horse needs less work to maintain fitness once fit. Okay, so once your horse is at peak fitness, you don't need to keep working it more and more to keep it at that level. You can drop it back a little bit, and as long as your horse is still doing regular work at that level, it will maintain that fitness. Okay, and I've put here less work equals less injuries. So we talked about repetitive strain before. You know, if your horse is working a lot, then there is more chance of it getting injured, whether that is through something like your repetitive strain, whether it slips, whether it trips, whatever it is. You know, the less work it's doing, the less chance of injury there is, especially with those things like repetitive strain. Stretches and massage techniques and things. So, you know, as I've mentioned a few times throughout, professional care is important, but there are lots of techniques that owners can incorporate. And I'm not going to go into a lot of depth today on this. I can do something at a later date if you'd like. As I mentioned before, correct riding is really important. So making sure that your horse is using themselves correctly, because if they're always sort of cheating in how they're moving, then they're not going to be building up their muscles correctly, and they also are at risk of injury. Grooming is really important, and when I was younger, going through my British Horse Society exams, we had to talk a lot about grooming and demonstrate grooming techniques, you know, strapping and quartering and things like that. And you know, while rugs are great in that they save us time, I do think they've also and I know particularly for me, and I'm guessing for a lot of people, probably reduce the amount of time we spend grooming our horse every day before and after riding. So try and spend a little bit of time grooming if you can. And spend time on those muscly areas. So some things like a rubber curry comb are really good for those areas. Use them in big circles around the muscly areas, over the neck, over the back, over the hindquarters. You could also use something like a massage ball. So yeah, just spend some time grooming. And also when you're grooming, you are feeling for your horse, so it gives you a really good idea if there are any areas which are a bit tight, a bit warm, a bit swollen, so that you can monitor what's going on with your horse. You can do some dynamic and static stretches. So your dynamic stretches are the ones where your horse is moving through them. So we would often incorporate these into the warm-up. Your static stretches, think about you holding the horse's leg out in front of it, so the horse isn't really holding that stretch itself, you're holding the stretch for the horse, and it is static. With the static stretches, especially if you're going to do anything like that, make sure they're done at the end of your workout when the horse is warmed up, not at the start when the muscles are cold. Your dynamic stretches, that's things like getting the horse to bend one way or the other, go down into a slightly longer frame, come up into a shorter frame, shorten its stride a little bit. You might start to introduce your lateral work a little bit in walk before introducing it in trot. So you're just introducing some of those things that you're going to be doing with your horse in the session at a slower, easier level. And I think hopefully that might answer a little bit a question that's just come through about long and low. So is long and low the preferred frame when working through a fitness plan? Not necessarily. Long and low, a lot of horses actually do this incorrectly, and so all they're doing is chucking, putting their head down as low as they can. They shove their sternum forward, so they sort of push out through their chest and trail their legs behind, and that's a really bad position for the horse to be in. So if you imagine the horse as a rectangle, so you've got your body, you've got the legs, and you want the legs straight down. What often happens is that rectangle changes into an, I can't remember the name of the shape, but you've got, either side is slanted forwards, and that's your horse's body, and then the legs come straight down. So hopefully I've explained that well enough, because that was really bad, and I don't have a picture of it. But your horse tipping forwards and putting the weight on the forehand is not good. So that's going to put more pressure on the forelimbs, and they're not actually then using themselves correctly through the back and the hindquarters. You definitely don't want the horse to be sort of jammed in and tense through the neck. We don't want their head behind the vertical. You don't want them to be really tight through the back. But it's, long and low, if they're doing it in the true sense of long and low, is okay. But the majority of horses that I see are actually sort of working in a false frame. So again, that's where it's really important to have somebody on the ground that can look at things for you and give you some tips on how the horse is actually moving. Magnesium and joint supplements. So magnesium is really good for sore muscles, so I suggest that you use magnesium. You can apply it directly to the skin, and that is absorbed and can help with with muscles and muscle soreness, and preventing muscle soreness. And joint supplements, even your younger horses, I would highly recommend we put them on some sort of supplement as a preventative measure. Cooling the body and the legs, really important, especially when it's hot, when they're hot. So make sure you cool your horse correctly, paying particular attention to the body and the legs, especially if they've had an injury, or maybe they've had a little bit of swelling on the legs. Then a lot of time cooling them. And I'm not going to preach about cooling, but if you check out Dr. David Marlin on Facebook, he talks a lot about cooling. There's a lot of myths going around about cooling that have been around for years, that science has actually disproven about cooling your horses. So just go and check out Dr. David Marlin on Facebook. And muscle liniments. So the same as us, if you're working your horse, then you might want to consider putting some muscle liniment on and have a feel of your horse. Just run your hands along them, press in a little bit. If you get a bit of a reaction, then consider giving them some sort of massaging in a muscle liniment to help to ease that soreness. Okay, so they're just the key points from this slightly longer than planned webinar. So if recovering from injury, then your vet or therapist input is essential. Think about those things that I talked about before bringing your horse into work. Ensure your horse has a balanced diet, and as we talked about, protein is one of the most important parts of that. Repetitive strain injury is the most common cause of injury, but that's not necessarily the rider drilling the horse in a specific movement all the time. It can be the horse using itself in a certain way and overloading a limb. Variety, so the type of surface and the type of work that you're doing is really important. You can do some different stretches, massage techniques. That's supposed to be riding techniques, not rising techniques. Increase fitness gradually, so the intensity, duration, frequency, increase one of those things at a time, not all three together. Rest days. Okay, so I didn't really talk about this, I don't think. So we talked about working your horse for 3 to 4 times during the week, but spread that out. Don't work it 4 times and then give it 3 days off. Okay, so the ideal way is to do 2 or 3 days work, then a day off, 2 or 3 days work, a day off. So we're giving it plenty of time to recover in between. And slower is better than faster. So, take your time with fitting your horse. If you've got that time, that is better in the long run. Okay, is there any benefit to massage pads such as the Equilibrium massage pad? Yeah, absolutely. So I don't use them as a therapist myself. However, I have lots of clients that use them, and I think they're great to use in between massage sessions. I don't think they replace a therapist. So even if you have some sort of massage pad, I would still recommend that you get get a therapist out regularly to your horse. But yeah, absolutely, see how your horse feels with it. Some horses like them better than others, but yes, definitely anything that you can do to help your horse out is a good thing. Is riding 1 day then rest for 2 okay? Riding 3 times a week? Yep, absolutely. It's just about that balance of things. So my own thing is you don't work your horse all in one go and then it has all of its rest days together. Okay, so that is the end. So I hope that you found that helpful. Say there was a lot to cover, so I haven't gone hugely in depth, but if you are interested in learning some more about that, I do have an online course which is launching next week. It is 8 sessions which will be emailed out to you, so you don't need to remember to log in anywhere. They'll all come through to you. They'll discuss lots of the things that we've discussed today, but go into a lot more depth with that. So I will send you that information out in an email if any of you are interested in finding out more about that. And there will be a special offer for those of you who have attended this webinar tonight. So my contact details are there. If you've got any questions, please feel free to shoot me a message on Facebook or email if I haven't managed to answer your questions today. But it's been great. You've been really interactive, so I loved all of your questions and hope you enjoyed it. So thank you.